All right, all right. So, welcome back to my channel. Today, let's loosen up a little bit. Let's loosen up. We're going to talk about stretching, not how to stretch, but we're going to talk about what exactly is stretching. Stretching is not like an elastic band. Muscles are muscles are viscoelastic. So when I say viscoelastic, we're talking about a viscous property and an elastic property. When we stretch a muscle group, so let's say hamstrings, when we stretch our hamstrings, the initial effect is really taking place at the tendon and the protective tissues such as elastin and collagen. And what happens is if we zoom in a little bit more, we're going to see that these fibers are composed of millions of sarcomeres. Now, what are sarcomeres, you might say? So sarcomeres are the smallest contractile units of the muscle tissues. When the long fibrous proteins of the sarcomeres start to relax, the muscle could actually start to elongate. But when it contracts, the muscle starts to shorten. And when we have that shortening phase, this is going to actually be the thing that helps us generate the force in our movement and, basically the force needed to move our body. Unlike a rubber band, stretching our bodies can actually decrease our resistance to that tension if we hold a stretch or we do a stretch for, let's say, 30 seconds. So we can see how these little bouts of 30 seconds can actually help us gain, or maybe we could say elongate our muscles a little bit. But it's important not just to think that we're stretching it like a rubber band. This increased flexibility is believed to reduce certain injuries when it comes to muscles, which is why it's so common in sports. However, due to the muscle's properties, if we are basically inactive for about 10 minutes after those stretches, our muscle's just going to go right back to how it was before that stretch. But let's take, for example, the Euro Cup. The Euro Cup is happening right now. So we got the soccer players and they're trying to limber up before their match. So they're doing their static stretches. You might see them like pulling on their leg or like stretching up their groin. But then you might see them doing specific movements. We call that dynamic stretching. And then they get into their match. Elevated temperatures throughout their match actually helps them maintain the results from their pregame stretch. Once these athletes rest, like we said, let's say like beyond 10 minutes, then their muscles are going to return to their original state, like we just mentioned. So does that mean flexibility is temporary? No, not at all. We could work on flexibility long term. So what happens here is improved flexibility comes from additional sarcomeres. Remember that word from back before? So this allows us to maintain strength at greater lengths, right? So strength at greater lengths. What I mean is as our range of motion is opening up, it could be from a kick if we're thinking about a soccer ball. It could be from a kick if we're thinking about a soccer player, or it could be maybe in a bench press when we're going down. All of a sudden, we have these range of motions that are happening throughout our day-to-day life. And if we can create that flexibility, like I just said, this allows us to maintain that strength throughout the range of motion. However, if we don't use it, we lose it. So what this means is that the number of sarcomeres can increase or decrease depending on how often they're used. Both muscle hypertrophy and stretching can have an influence on the number and arrangement of sarcomeres. Remember that word, sarcomeres? So if we take, for example, muscle hypertrophy, think of resistance training, right? So we're lifting some weights and we're starting to develop muscle hypertrophy. And what this means is that generally there's going to be an increase in the size and number of myofibrils. Now we say myofibrils. What the heck does that mean? Myofibrils is where the sarcomeres are contained. Okay, so we're going to have an increase in size and numbers of myofibrils within the muscle, leading to more sarcomere arrangements. And the arrangement is actually, it leads to more sarcomere in parallel. And this is actually why when we start to develop hypertrophy, we start to have this type of a thicker muscle. That characteristic of the muscles getting bigger, it's kind of thicker, and that's basically what's happening. Resistance training also stimulates the synthesis of contractile proteins such as actin and myosin. So the synthesis, so now we have the creation of actin and myosin, and this contributes to the formation of additional sarcomeres within the existing fibers. So we have the what did I just say? The synthesis of the actin and myosin, and that's going to have an effect on the sarcomeres. And then we have the fact that the hypertrophy is going to increase the size and numbers of myofibrils. And you see there's these two aspects right here where resistance training all of a sudden can actually be extremely beneficial for our overall flexibility, which we don't often think about. But now let's think about stretching. And when we think about stretching, this can increase the number of sarcomeres in series. And now, when we think about stretching increasing the number of sarcomeres within series within the muscle fibers, this is typically why when we see people that don't really resistance train, but they do a lot of stretching, right? So let's take yoga, for example. They typically have they typically have a more a leaner look, I should say, a leaner look to them. And that's because they're not building on those sarcomeres in parallel. They're really doing it more, like I said, in series. And this could have an actual effect on the look of the muscle. So how to improve flexibility? Now, when it comes to flexibility, I do remember that there was research and it said that we want to do this for 2 months, and every day we got to have like a 10-minute routine, and we got to stay consistent. But also it's very important to remember not to hold stretches for too long, because this could actually be pretty dangerous. So what I like to think about is when we do stretches, I like to think of it in the same manner as if I was doing a program in the gym. Make yourself little sets, 30-second holds if we're doing static stretching, and take a little break and then repeat, aiming for those results. Try not to overstretch, right? More is not better. We have to keep this in mind. And as well, dynamic stretching. I absolutely love dynamic stretching. I pretty much never, and when I say pretty much, I feel like I could safely say never. I almost never do static stretching when I'm with clients. We start our workout with a very specific type of routine, usually on the treadmill. And then after just a couple minutes, we come into a nice dynamic routine that I set for everybody. And we try to increase our range of motion slowly over that routine. So let's say, for example, it's inchworms, and you can see that I'm sitting on a grass patch. We do the length and back. And I always tell my clients not to focus too much on opening up their range of motion. It's okay to start tight and just allow the body to slowly increase in its range of motion. Regular stretching actually also affects our brain, because the more that we stretch, this thing happens where our pain threshold starts to change. And as our pain threshold starts to increase, we then have the capability of maybe applying a little bit more tension, always keeping in mind safe range of motion, whatnot. Now, as I've mentioned before, we want to always have a little bit of caution when stretching. So many people, time and time again, I see when they stretch, they're really looking for that pain, and they overstretch. And I'm not going to get into exactly what happens or why that might actually feel good by turning other things off. But we want to keep in mind that we don't want to overstretch. And something I've thought about for years and years and years, which is why I'm not a huge fan of static stretching. I'm biased, but it is what it is, just being honest. When we overstretch, what happens is that sometimes an individual could end up having a beyond normal range of motion on their joint. And what once was creating stability and health is now essentially creating instability, right? Because if it's beyond that range of motion, all of a sudden we're not going to have strength in that abnormal range of motion. Maybe some people will. I know like in martial arts, sometimes they really have quite a wide range of motion as far as actual strength. But, that's neither here or there. We're just talking about the normal person. Normal. I don't even want to use that word, but we're just talking about the typical person looking for a little bit more range of motion, more flexibility. So that's really what I want you to keep in mind when we're thinking about stretching. We're thinking about what exactly is happening. It's not an elastic, so let's not, just think that we could just stretch and whatever. We don't want to pull anything. We want to be very conscientious about what we're doing when we're stretching. We want to respect it. And if you really want to feel that gain over a long period of time, be consistent and don't overdo it. Just a little 10-minute routine every single day for 2 months. You'll start to really feel the benefits of stretching. But remember, don't overdo it. Just look for your normal range of motion. If you feel some tightness, hold it. If you're doing static. And if anything, try and do a little research on good dynamic stretches. I love those. You could even comment and it will be my pleasure to list a couple dynamic stretches that could help everybody out. Or most people out. I don't know everybody, but I could give some examples anyways. So, as always, thank you so much for tuning in. It's always appreciated. Like, subscribe, comment, all those beautiful things. And until next time, stretch a little bit, get all flexible, and I'll see you later. All right, take care. Bye.